Okay, let's unpack this. That familiar feeling, right? Almost like a tug of war.
Mm-hmm.
On one side, you've got this, ingrained idea of American exceptionalism, kind of humming in the background all the time with a
That
bad.
constant affirmation, yeah.
But then you look at, well, just daily life,
Yeah.
the reality people are actually dealing with.
And you start to wonder.
Exactly. You wonder if the picture's quite as simple as that first feeling suggests.
And that tension, that friction between the idea and the reality, it's a really strong place to start a discussion.
Absolutely. It makes you question things. And that's really the core of what we're diving into today.
All right.
Our source is a YouTube video. It's called American Reacts to Why America Sucks at Everything.
Catchy title?
It is, and it features someone reacting to a stand-up routine by the comedian David Cross.
Ah, David Cross. Okay, so expect some sharp commentary?
Definitely. He takes a pretty, let's say, unvarnished look at areas where the U.S. might be, well, falling short, in his view anyway.
So we've got layers here, the original comedy bit and then someone reacting to it.
Right. And our job, our sort of mission for this deep dive, is to explore the main arguments from both the comedian and the reactor.
Looking past the humor to the substance underneath.
Precisely. We want to get under the skin of these arguments about America's performance, especially thinking about its incredible wealth.
So understanding the claims about where things aren't measuring up and what that actually means for, regular people's lives here.
That's it. We're basically putting the video's claims under our own microscope.
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways about the connection between America's resources and its population's well-being, according to these sources, of course?
Okay, got it. So where do they start?
Well, the first thing that really grabs you is this massive contradiction, this paradox.
There it is.
America is, by many measures, the wealthiest nation on Earth. David Cross apparently throws out these huge figures like $100 trillion in household wealth.
Wow.
And, tons of millionaires. Just a staggering amount of money floating around.
That sets a pretty high bar, doesn't it? If you have that much economic power, you'd expect, well, a really high quality of life for most people.
That's the expectation. But here's where it gets really interesting. The core argument presented is that despite this incredible wealth, many Americans actually experience a standard of living that doesn't necessarily line up with that top-tier status.
Okay. Compared to who?
The video points to comparisons with places like Germany, Finland, Britain, countries with, considerably less overall wealth.
But potentially better outcomes in certain areas.
That's the argument. Better outcomes in key areas that affect daily life. And it's this paradox that really drives the whole discussion and the video.
So the big question becomes, how is that possible? Where's the disconnect between the national balance sheet and individual well-being?
Exactly. What explains why these massive resources don't automatically mean better lives across the board for Americans?
And what answers do the sources offer?
Well, one of the main lines of argument revolves around taxes. And crucially, the public services you get or don't get for those taxes.
Ah, the classic tax debate.
Right. But David Cross's point, as presented, is that the money Americans pay in taxes just doesn't seem to translate into the same level or quality of public services you see elsewhere.
That's a really important distinction because people often assume, lower taxes are always better.
Yeah, but the argument here is that what you get back for those tax dollars is maybe even more important.
Makes sense. Are we just talking federal income tax or?
No, it seems broader. When you start adding it all up, federal, state, local taxes, sales tax.
Okay.
And then you add in the stuff that's often publicly funded in other countries, but is a big private expense here, like health insurance premiums.
Right. That's a huge one in the U.S.
The picture changes quite a bit.
So how does it compare according to the video?
Well, this is where the numbers get interesting. They mention Canada average married worker, 2 kids pays about 11% of their wages on these combined costs.
Okay, 11%.
In the UK, it's apparently around 26%.
All right, still less than half. And the U.S.?
A whopping 43% is the phrase David Cross uses.
43%? Wow. That's a lot higher.
Significantly higher than those other examples.
And the kicker, I assume, is the argument that you're not getting proportionally better services for that higher percentage.
That's exactly it. The video really emphasizes that despite paying more as a share of income, Americans are argued to get comparatively less back in terms of comprehensive public services.
Which raises big questions about efficiency, doesn't it? And priorities. Where's the money going?
It's like paying for the deluxe package, but getting the basic service. And on a lighter note, the reactor in the YouTube video adds this funny little aside
Yeah.
about hoping Europeans don't find out how, well, underwhelming regular American beer is.
Ah, a bit of self-deprecation.
Yeah, just a relatable way to kind of poke fun at that idea that everything American is automatically the best.
It's a small point, but it underscores the bigger theme. Perception versus reality when you actually compare things side by side.
Totally. But let's get back to the more serious side of things, the consequences.
Right, the consequences of what the source calls underfunded services.
David Cross apparently paints a pretty stark picture. Crumbling infrastructure,
We hear about that a lot.
really disturbing levels of homelessness, and millions of kids facing hunger in the richest country.
These are very visible problems, things that seem hard to square with that $100 trillion wealth figure.
Exactly. And the discussion in the video really zooms in on one massive example, the U.S. healthcare system.
Ah, yes. Always a contentious topic. How do they describe it?
In pretty strong terms, the most expensive, least efficient, and least effective in the developed world.
Wow.
David Cross apparently calls it the devil's trifecta.
Okay, that's quite a claim. What's the evidence presented for that?
Well, the video cites some frankly concerning statistics, like
No.
fewer hospital beds per person than Turkey or Brunei.
Really? Turkey or Brunei?
That's what's claimed. And life expectancy lower than Lebanon or Cuba.
Lower than Cuba. That's surprising.
And it gets worse. Within the U.S., some regions like the Mississippi Delta or Appalachia apparently have life expectancies similar to Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, that's shocking, actually. These aren't small differences.
Not at all. They represent real gaps in health outcomes. And remember that UN Commissioner quote David Cross references,
Remind me.
describing conditions in parts of West Virginia as like third world conditions of absolute poverty.
Jarring is the word. It just highlights these huge internal disparities.
It really does. It forces you to think about how national wealth doesn't automatically prevent these pockets of severe hardship.
And there were other health stats mentioned?
Yeah, infant mortality, higher in the U.S. than in Russia or Serbia, according to the source.
So across several key indicators, beds, life expectancy, infant mortality, the argument is the U.S. is lagging behind its peers, despite spending way more.
That seems to be the core point about healthcare.
So why? Why is it so expensive here? Does the video get into that?
It does. David Cross apparently touches on a few things. One is just the sheer complexity of the whole system.
Navigating insurance.
Right. Dealing with in-network versus out-of-network doctors, fighting with insurance companies over what's covered.
It can be exhausting. And expensive in terms of time, too.
And then there are the administrative costs.
Yeah.
Apparently, over a third of all healthcare spending in the U.S. goes just to administration.
A third just
Yeah.
running the system, not actual care.
That's the figure cited, which is apparently way higher than in other countries.
That seems incredibly inefficient. A huge chunk of money not going directly to patient care.
Yeah. And then Cross makes this sort of sarcastic comparison to evil socialist-like countries
Mm-hmm.
where, public hospitals just treat you, often for free at the point of service. It's a stark contrast in philosophy.
And does the video give concrete cost examples? Because that often hits home.
Oh, yeah. Insulin is a big one. Around $20 in Canada versus $300 or more here.
That difference is just staggering for the same product.
And MRI scans. The U.S. cost cited is around $1,100. Compare that to Australia, maybe $215, or Spain, around $180.
So multiples higher in the U.S., not just a little bit more expensive.
Exactly. A huge financial burden, especially if you don't have great insurance or any insurance.
Which leads to another point they raised, doesn't it? About fundraising for medical bills.
Yeah, this one was pretty shocking. Reportedly, 1 in 3 GoFundMe campaigns in America, 1 in 3 are for medical bills.
1 in 3. That really says something about the lack of a safety net, doesn't it? People turning to online charity for essential health care.
It really underscores how precarious things can be if you get sick. It's presented as a major symptom of a system that doesn't protect people adequately.
And they shared that story about the Walmart employee?
Right, Susan Finley. It's presented as a tragic example, reportedly fired for taking one sick day too many, lost her insurance, and then died. It highlights the real-world devastating consequences.
It's a powerful anecdote. Shows how healthcare access, or lack thereof, is tied directly to employment and basic worker protections.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a stark reminder of how high the stakes can be.
Okay, so healthcare is a huge piece of the puzzle they present. What else?
Well, shifting gears slightly, they also talk about work and social support.
How so?
The point is made that Americans, on average, work longer hours than people in other rich countries.
Oh, okay, I think I've heard that before.
And the argument in the video isn't necessarily that Americans are just naturally harder workers or more ambitious, but that it's often driven by necessity, a need to work more because there's less of a robust social safety net.
So less support if you lose your job, fewer family benefits, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Less generous unemployment support, family benefits. The pressure to keep working and work longer hours is higher when the alternatives are less secure.
That makes sense. And didn't they mention paid time off?
Yeah, that was another key point. The U.S. is highlighted as being like one of the only wealthy nations that doesn't legally guarantee paid time off.
So guaranteed vacation time. Or parental leave.
Nope, not federally mandated paid leave. It really shows a different set of priorities regarding work-life balance compared to many other places.
It suggests a different kind of social contract between employers, employees, and the state.
Definitely. And tied into all this is the issue of unions.
Okay. Low unionization rates in the U.S. compared to some other developed countries.
Right. The video suggests these lower rates, combined with what's perceived as hostility towards workers' rights movements. Cross apparently says they get shut down. All contribute to this environment where workers maybe have less bargaining power and fewer protections.
So the dynamic between labor and business and government policy is presented as another factor shaping people's working lives and financial security.
Exactly. So if you pull back and look at the bigger picture, what are the wider societal impacts of all this deprivation, as Cross calls it?
What does the video link it to?
Some pretty heavy trends, things like fraying communities, weakening social bonds, rising rates of depression and suicide. They mentioned deaths of despair.
Right, that term referring to suicide, drug overdoses, alcoholic liver disease, often linked to economic hardship and hopelessness.
Yeah. And the really concerning decline in overall American life expectancy recently.
That's a major red flag, isn't it? When life expectancy actually goes down in a wealthy country, it suggests something fundamental is wrong.
It really does. The video also points out higher child poverty rates in the U.S. compared to other developed nations.
Still, despite the overall wealth.
But apparently so. And also a larger percentage of workers earning significantly less than the median income. So greater inequality.
So it's painting a picture where the economic pie is huge, but it's distributed very unevenly, and the safety net has holes.
That seems to be the core message. And it's not just social stuff. They even bring up infrastructure again.
What was the example?
The statistic that the U.S. has fewer miles of high-speed rail than Uzbekistan.
Uzbekistan. That's quite the comparison. Makes you think about investment priorities.
It does. And finally, they touch on the justice system, highlighting the incredibly high incarceration rate in the U.S.
Which is well known, yeah.
And also a higher rate of police killings compared to some developing nations. The examples given were Angola and Sudan.
Wow. Those are stark comparisons, raising really serious questions about justice and safety.
Definitely uncomfortable data points presented in the video.
So after laying all this out, healthcare, work, inequality, infrastructure, justice, what does the source argue is the reason, the underlying cause for all these alleged shortcomings?
Well, the argument put forward, particularly by David Cross, is that it boils down to priorities.
Whose priorities?
The argument is that the system prioritizes what he calls parasitical middleman industries.
Okay. Like insurance?
Finance.
Yeah.
That seems to be the implication. And generally prioritizing the interests of the well-connected and the ultra-rich over the actual well-being of the general population.
So a critique of how economic and political power is structured and used, that it benefits a select few at the expense of the many?
That's the essence of the argument presented, that the system is skewed.
And the YouTube reactor, did they add anything to that?
Yeah, they had their own take, suggesting that even just a slight decrease in greed at the very top could actually result in significantly better outcomes for everyone else. It was a pretty direct comment.
Kind of implies that the resources are there, but they're concentrated and perhaps not being used for the broader public good.
That's definitely the implication.
Yeah.
That a different allocation could address many of these problems.
Okay. So wrapping this up then, this deep dive, looking at the YouTube reaction to David Cross.
Yeah, it's really highlighted this central argument. America, despite having immense wealth,
What richest country?
the sources argue it underperforms in really fundamental areas: healthcare, social support, infrastructure.
Right. leading to outcomes for many citizens that are worse, arguably, than in countries with far fewer resources.
And we've walked through how the video presents the wealth paradox, the tax and services issue, the consequences like poor health outcomes or shaky work support, the broader societal impact.
Always focusing on the arguments made in the source material itself.
Exactly. So here's something I really want you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay.
Considering all the points and the data brought up in these sources we've discussed, what do you think are the most significant reasons for this apparent gap, this disconnect between America's huge wealth and the well-being of so many of its people?
It's a complex question.
It is, and maybe thinking beyond just diagnosing the problem. What potential paths forward do you see? How could that gap possibly be bridged?
Yeah, what might solutions look like? It's definitely not simple. There are many different viewpoints on that, of course.
For sure. But engaging with these questions, thinking critically about the information, like the points raised in the video, that feels like a really important exercise.
Absolutely. And if this has piqued your interest, maybe check out the original YouTube video we discussed, American Reacts to Why America Sucks at Everything.
Or even some of David Cross's stand-up directly. It's certainly provocative material. Gives you a lot to think about.
Definitely food for thought.